My name is Angela, and I was 15 years old when my mother abandoned me at JFK Airport. I can still remember the confusion washing over me as I watched her walk away with her new husband and his kids, their luggage rolling behind them. I waited for hours, slowly realizing she wasn't coming back for me. That day changed everything. The betrayal cut deep, but making that desperate call to my estranged father would unexpectedly transform my life forever. Before I share how this abandonment became my salvation, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join me on this journey of rediscovery. Growing up, my early childhood memories were filled with moments of happiness. My parents seemed to love each other and our home was filled with laughter and warmth. I remember Sunday pancake breakfasts, beach trips in summer, and the safety I felt between them. But everything changed when I turned 8. The fights began quietly at first. Hushed arguments after I went to bed gradually escalated into full-blown shouting matches in the kitchen. I would hide under my covers, clutching my stuffed rabbit, wishing the yelling would stop. Within months, my father moved out, and the bitter custody battle began. Court appearances became a regular part of our routine. My mother would dress me up in my nicest clothes, coach me on what to say, then parade me in front of judges and mediators. She fought viciously for primary custody, not because she particularly wanted me around, but because she knew it would hurt my father. She won, of course. After the divorce was finalized, my father took a job across the country in California. He said it was for a fresh start, but I always suspected my mother had made staying in New York too painful. Our communication grew sparse. Weekly calls became monthly, then occasional. Birthday cards and Christmas presents arrived, but the distance between us grew with each passing year. Meanwhile, my mother wasted no time diving back into the dating scene. A parade of men started coming and going through our apartment. Some lasted a few dates, others a few months. None of them paid much attention to me, and frankly, I preferred it that way. I became adept at making myself scarce, perfecting the art of invisibility in my own home. Then Richard entered our lives. Tall, silver-haired, and perpetually dressed in expensive suits, he was different from my mother's usual type. He was a wealthy investment banker with 2 children of his own, Taylor and Jackson, who were 16 and 13 at the time. From the moment Richard appeared, my mother transformed. Gone was the woman who had worn the same bathrobe for years and complained about grocery prices. Suddenly, she was scheduling hair appointments, obsessing over designer clothes, and speaking with this artificial laugh I had never heard before. She became fixated on Richard's wealth, constantly mentioning his vacation homes, his car collection, his connections. I quickly realized I was becoming an inconvenience in her new narrative. When Richard would come over, she would tell me to stay in my room or make myself scarce. When we were invited to dinner at his mansion in Westchester, she hissed warnings at me in the car to not embarrass her, to be on my best behavior, to make a good impression. Their romance moved at whirlwind speed. Within 6 months of meeting, they were engaged, and a month after that, married in a lavish ceremony where I was relegated to the back row rather than given a place in the wedding party. Taylor served as maid of honor while I watched from a distance, feeling like a prop rather than a daughter. After the wedding, we moved into Richard's mansion. My mother made a big show of how lucky I was to be living in such a beautiful home, how fortunate to have this new opportunity. What she failed to mention was that while she would be sharing the master suite with Richard and Taylor, and Jackson would keep their large bedrooms in the main hallway, I would be given the smallest room in a completely different wing of the house, separated from everyone else by a long corridor and staircase. My step-siblings made it clear from day one that I wasn't part of their family. Taylor, with her perfect blonde hair and designer wardrobe, would look me up and down with barely concealed disgust. Jackson, mimicking his sister's behavior, would either ignore me completely or make cutting remarks about my clothes or my taste in music. They were spoiled, entitled, and completely unaccustomed to considering anyone outside their charmed circle. Through all of this, I tried to maintain some relationship with my father. Our calls were infrequent and somewhat awkward. He would ask about school, I would give vague responses about it being fine. Neither of us mentioned how much we missed each other or how wrong everything had become. In retrospect, I think we were both trying to protect each other from the truth of our situation. School became my only refuge, though even that was complicated. I had to switch to a private academy near Richard's home where I knew no one. The students there came from wealthy families and had known each other since kindergarten. Breaking into their social circles proved nearly impossible. I ate lunch alone most days, buried myself in books, and counted the hours until graduation, when I could escape to college and start over. The longer we lived with Richard and his children, the more I felt like an outsider in what was supposed to be my family. Dinners were dominated by discussions about Taylor's equestrian competitions or Jackson's lacrosse tournaments. When I tried to share news about an essay I had written that received recognition, my mother quickly changed the subject back to Taylor's upcoming dressage event. I became a ghost in that house, learning to walk quietly to take up less space to need less attention. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed to survive a few more years. I never imagined that my mother would make her rejection so brutally clear, or that abandonment would be my unexpected salvation. The announcement came during a Sunday brunch in late May. Richard, raising his mimosa glass, proudly declared he was taking the family on a 2-week vacation to Bali during summer break. Taylor squealed with excitement, Jackson high-fived his father, and my mother beamed with delight, already talking about the swimwear she would need to purchase. I sat quietly pushing eggs around my plate, unsure if I was included in this plan. It wasn't until later that evening when I worked up the courage to ask my mother directly. "Am I going to Bali too?" I questioned as she applied her nightly face cream. She looked at me through the mirror, surprised by the question. "Of course you are. You are my daughter after all." Her words should have been reassuring, but something in her tone left me unsettled. Still, I allowed myself a flutter of excitement. I had never travelled internationally before. My passport was still blank, waiting for its first stamp. Maybe this trip would be a chance for us to bond for this fractured family, to find some common ground. The preparations began immediately. My mother and Taylor embarked on numerous shopping expeditions, returning with bags from high-end boutiques and department stores. They purchased resort wear, evening outfits, swimsuits, sandals, sun hats, and more accessories than seemed necessary for a 2-week trip. When I asked my mother when we would shop for my vacation clothes, she waved dismissively. "Just wear what you have. We can pick up anything else you need at the resort." One evening, as I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, I overheard Richard and my mother arguing in their bedroom. "I do not understand why she needs to come," Richard said, his voice low but intense. "This is supposed to be a family vacation." "She is family," my mother responded, though her defense sounded hollow. "You know what I mean," Richard continued. "Taylor and Jackson have been looking forward to this trip for months. Angela will just complicate things. She never tries to fit in." There was a long pause before my mother spoke again. "I will handle Angela. Just let me worry about it." I crept back to my room, tears stinging my eyes. I considered confronting my mother about what I had heard, but experience had taught me that would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on practical matters, checking that my passport was still valid, researching Bali online, and making mental notes of what to pack. As the departure date grew closer, there was a flurry of activity around expediting my passport renewal. My mother seemed annoyed by the extra errand, complaining about the long lines and additional fees for rush processing. I offered to pay for the expediting fee with money I had saved from my part-time library job, which seemed to placate her somewhat. The night before our departure, I overheard another argument. This one was more heated, with Richard's voice rising, despite obvious attempts to keep quiet. "This is ridiculous," he was saying. "Do you know how much her ticket cost at this late date? Nearly double what we paid for the others?" "I told you I would contribute from my personal account," my mother replied. "That is not the point," Richard snapped back. "This trip was meant to be a bonding experience for us, for our family. She will keep to herself," my mother promised. "You will hardly notice she is there." I packed my suitcase with a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Each item I placed inside felt like a mistake, an act of foolish hope. But I continued anyway, carefully selecting my most presentable clothes, the ones least likely to draw criticism from Taylor or disdain from my mother. The morning of our departure arrived with a tense atmosphere hanging over the house. Richard barely acknowledged me at breakfast, focusing instead on last-minute instructions to the housekeeper about mail and plant care. My mother was distracted, checking and rechecking travel documents, making phone calls, and fussing over Taylor's excessive luggage. We left for JFK Airport in 2 cars. Richard drove his Range Rover with Taylor and Jackson, while my mother and I followed in her Mercedes. The drive was silent, except for the GPS occasionally announcing directions. I tried making conversation several times, asking about our connecting flights, or what our villa in Bali would be like, but my mother's responses were clipped and uninformative. "Will we be near the beach?" I asked. "Yes," she answered without elaboration. "Do Taylor and Jackson know how to swim?" I tried again. "Of course they do," she replied with irritation. Eventually, I gave up and stared out the window, watching the New York skyline recede behind us. Despite everything, a small part of me still hoped this vacation might change things. Maybe in a beautiful exotic location away from the pressures of everyday life, my mother would remember that I was her daughter. Maybe Taylor and Jackson would relax and include me in their activities. Maybe Richard would see that I wasn't trying to intrude on his perfect family, that I just wanted to belong somewhere. JFK Airport was bustling with summer travelers when we arrived. Families with excited children, couples holding hands, business travelers moving efficiently through the crowds. We met Richard and my step-siblings at the international terminal, and for a moment, as we all stood together and with our luggage, we almost looked like a normal family. The check-in process started normally. Richard approached the counter with our passports and reservation details. The agent began processing our information, printing baggage tags, checking identifications. I noticed Richard pulling my mother aside, their heads close together as they spoke in hushed tones. My mother glanced back at me with an expression I couldn't read, then nodded at something Richard said. I should have known then that something was wrong. I should have felt the betrayal coming. Instead, I adjusted my backpack and waited patiently, still believing I was about to embark on my first international adventure. Angela, wait here with the carry-ons while we check on something, my mother instructed, pointing to a row of seats near the check-in area. We will be right back. I nodded and took a seat surrounded by their hand luggage. Richard, Taylor and Jackson were already walking toward the customer service desk, and my mother quickly followed after giving me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I pulled out my phone to text my mother. Where are you? Everything okay? No response. After 20 minutes, I started to feel the first real pangs of anxiety. The crowd around me ebbed and flowed, families and couples proceeding to security while I remained fixed in place watching the customer service desk where my family had disappeared. At the 30-minute mark, I tried calling my mother. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, I am still waiting by the check-in. Please let me know what is happening. An hour had now passed and a terrible realization was beginning to dawn on me. An airline employee approached a woman with kind eyes and a concerned expression. Are you waiting for someone, sweetie? She asked. My family, I explained. They went to customer service about an hour ago. She frowned slightly. Are you traveling alone? No, I am with my mother and stepfather. We are going to Bali. The woman looked around, then back at me. Would you like me to help you find them? Before I could answer, my phone pinged with a text message. Relief flooded through me until I read the words on the screen. There's a problem with your ticket. You can figure it out. We have to board. I stared at my mother's message in disbelief, my hands beginning to shake. This couldn't be happening. I called her immediately, but again straight to voicemail. I called 3 more times in rapid succession, growing more desperate with each unanswered ring. The airline employee was still standing nearby, watching with growing concern. Is everything all right? I showed her the text message, unable to form words through the tightness in my throat. Let me check your reservation, she offered gently. What is your name? Angela Williams, I managed to whisper. She took me to the counter where another agent began typing my information into the system. The seconds stretched like hours as I waited, clinging to the hope that there was just some misunderstanding, some computer error that could be quickly resolved. I am sorry, the agent said, finally looking genuinely troubled. There is no reservation under that name for any flights today. That cannot be right, I insisted, panic rising in my voice. I am traveling with Patricia and Richard Harrington. They are my mother and stepfather. They should be on the flight to Bali with a connection in Dubai. More typing, more waiting. The Harringtons are checked in for that flight, the agent confirmed, along with Taylor and Jackson Harrington, but there is no reservation for Angela Williams. Can you check if they have already boarded? I asked, my voice barely audible. A few minutes later, my worst fears were confirmed. They had not only checked in, but had already passed through security and were likely at the gate preparing to board their first flight. The reality of what was happening hit me with the force of a physical blow. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the floor of the terminal, my body shaking with silent sobs. The kind airline employee knelt beside me, her arm around my shoulders, speaking words of comfort that I couldn't process through the roaring in my ears. Eventually, I was guided to a private office where a customer service manager and an airport security officer waited. They asked questions I struggled to answer through my tears. How old was I? 15. Did I have other family in the area? No. Was there someone who could come get me? I didn't know. Your mother left you at the airport without a ticket. The security officer clarified his tone, suggesting he was having trouble believing the situation. I nodded, showing them the text message as proof. "This is a serious matter," he said, exchanging glances with the customer service manager. "We need to consider involving Child Protective Services. A minor cannot be abandoned like this." The words Child Protective Services cut through my fog of despair. Stories I had heard about foster care flashed through my mind, adding a new layer of terror to my already overwhelming situation. "Please," I begged. "I just need some time to figure this out. Please don't call CPS yet." The adults exchanged another look, their concern evident. "Do you have any other family members we could contact?" the manager asked gently. I thought about my father, thousands of miles away in California. We barely spoke anymore. Would he even answer if I called? And if he did, what could he possibly do from across the country? But I had no other options. "My father," I said hesitantly. "He lives in California." They nodded encouragingly. "Could I have a few minutes to call him privately?" I asked. They agreed, leaving me alone in the office with my phone and my shattered world. I stared at my father's contact information, my finger hovering over the call button. What would I even say after all this time? How could I explain that my own mother had abandoned me at an airport to go on vacation with her new family? Another text from my mother pinged through. "This is for the best. You're too much drama for this trip. Stay with a friend until we get back." The casual cruelty of her words solidified something inside me. With trembling fingers, I pressed call on my father's number and held my breath as it rang. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. Each ring amplified my anxiety, my mind racing with possibilities of rejection or indifference. "Hello." His voice sounded exactly as I remembered, yet somehow different. Deeper, maybe, or more confident. "Dad," I managed to say, my voice breaking on that single syllable. There was a pause. "Angela, is that you?" The genuine surprise and warmth in his tone unleashed the dam of emotions I had been struggling to contain. I broke down completely, sobbing into the phone, unable to form coherent sentences. "Angela, what is wrong? Are you hurt? Where are you?" His questions came rapid fire, filled with concern that I hadn't heard, directed at me in years. Between sobs, I explained what had happened. How my mother and Richard had left me at JFK Airport without a ticket. How they were already on their way to Bali. How airport security was talking about calling Child Protective Services. When I finished, there was silence on the line. For a terrible moment, I thought maybe he had hung up, that this final rejection would complete my abandonment. Then I heard him take a deep breath. "Listen to me carefully, Angela," he said, his voice steady and determined. "Do not move from where you are. I am coming for you." "But you are in California," I reminded him, confused through my tears. "That does not matter. I will be there as soon as humanly possible. Give the phone to whoever is in charge there." I handed my phone to the security officer, who had returned to check on me. I watched as he spoke with my father, explaining the situation from his perspective, answering questions, and finally agreeing to something with repeated nods. "Your father wants to speak with you again," he said, handing the phone back. "Angela, I have arranged everything. You will wait in the airport lounge where the staff will look after you. I am getting on a plane immediately. I will be there in a few hours." "How?" I asked, unable to imagine how he could possibly reach me so quickly. "Let me worry about that. Just stay put and know that I am coming for you. I promise." After we hung up, I was escorted to a premium lounge where the staff had been informed of my situation. They provided me with food and drinks, though I had no appetite. I sat in a quiet corner, hugging myself, trying to process the reality of what had happened. Hours passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "This is for the best. You're too much drama for this trip. Stay with a friend until we get back." The casual cruelty of her message triggered a fresh wave of tears. How could she do this? What kind of mother abandons her child at an airport? The pain was unbearable, a physical ache in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. A kind security guard checked on me periodically, bringing water and tissues, offering awkward words of comfort. "Your father is on his way," he reminded me. "You will be okay." As I sat there, memories flooded back of other times my mother had prioritized herself over me. The school plays she had missed because she had dates. The parent-teacher conferences she had skipped because they interfered with her social life. The birthdays where my celebration had been an afterthought, quickly arranged and minimally attended. I had always made excuses for her, convinced myself that she loved me in her own way. Now the pattern was undeniable and devastating. My phone rang again. It was my father. "Angela, I just landed. I will be there in about 20 minutes. "You are already here?" I asked, astonished. "How?" "I will explain everything. Just hang tight." Less than half an hour later, the lounge attendant approached me. "Angela, your father is here." I looked up to see a man I barely recognized. My father had aged in the years since I had seen him last. Silver threading through his dark hair at the temples lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But he was here, actually here standing in front of me, with concern etched across his face. I launched myself into his arms, crying all over again. He held me tightly, one hand cradling the back of my head, just as he had when I was small. "I got you," he whispered. "I got you now." After what felt like hours, but was probably just minutes, he gently pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders as he looked me over. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" I shook my head. "They just left me. They didn't even buy me a ticket." A flash of anger crossed his face before he composed himself. "Let's get out of here. We can talk more once we're somewhere safe." I gathered my suitcase, and we were escorted by security through the terminal. Instead of heading toward the main exit, however, we were led through a series of restricted areas until we emerged onto the tarmac. That's when I saw it. A sleek private jet with the name Westridge Capital emblazoned on the side. I turned to my father in confusion. "What is this?" "My company's jet," he explained simply. "It was the fastest way to get to you." Shock rendered me speechless as we climbed the stairs into a cabin that looked nothing like the commercial planes I had flown on for school trips. Butter-soft leather seats, polished wood tables, and a flight attendant who greeted my father by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Williams. We're cleared for immediate departure." As the jet taxied for takeoff, the reality of my father's apparent wealth began to sink in. He sat across from me, watching my expression carefully. "I know this must be confusing," he said once we were airborne. "You have a private jet." I stated the obvious, still trying to process everything. He nodded. "I've done well in finance. Very well. I started my own investment firm 7 years ago, and things took off quickly." "But then why?" I trailed off, unsure how to frame the question that was burning inside me. Why had he stayed away? Why hadn't he fought harder to be in my life? As if reading my mind, he leaned forward, his expression pained. "Angela, there's something you need to know. I never wanted to leave you. After the divorce, your mother made it nearly impossible for me to see you. She blocked my calls, returned my letters, filed complaints when I tried to visit." "What?" "No, she told me you were too busy with your new life." I protested weakly, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they rang hollow. My father shook his head sadly. "I sent child support checks far above what the court ordered. I established a college fund in your name. I tried to fight for joint custody 3 separate times, but your mother had powerful lawyers and judges tend to side with mothers." Tears filled my eyes again, but these were different. These came from the realization that my father hadn't abandoned me as I had believed all these years. He had been trying to reach me while my mother had been cutting him off. "I should have tried harder," he continued, his voice thick with regret. "I should have found a way. I'm so sorry, Angela." "You're here now," I whispered, reaching across to take his hand. We spent the remainder of the flight really talking for the first time in years. He told me about his company, about the home he had built in Malibu, about his girlfriend Sophia, who he thought I would like. I told him about school, about my interest in writing about the loneliness I had felt in Richard's house. As California came into view below us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The betrayal of my mother's abandonment was still a raw wound, but somehow, miraculously, it had led me back to my father and what promised to be a very different life than the one I had left behind at JFK Airport. The private jet landed at a small airport north of Los Angeles. As we descended the stairs, the warm California air enveloped me, carrying the faint scent of ocean and eucalyptus. A black SUV was waiting on the tarmac, and the driver greeted my father with respectful familiarity. "Welcome home, Mr. Williams." The drive to my father's home took us along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean stretching endlessly to our right. I pressed my face against the window, taking in the dramatic coastline so different from the New York landscapes I was accustomed to. "Almost there," my father said, as we turned onto a private road that wound upward through lush landscaping. Nothing could have prepared me for my first view of his home. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, the modern structure of glass and stone seemed to emerge organically from the hillside. Expansive windows reflected the brilliant blue of the ocean and sky, while carefully maintained gardens surrounded the property. "This is where you live?" I asked in disbelief. He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "It's a bit much for one person, which is why Sophia moved in last year. Now it finally feels like a home." As the car pulled into the circular driveway, the front door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall and athletic, with short dark hair and a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. "You must be Angela," she said, approaching as we exited the car. "I'm Sophia. I'm so glad you're here, though I wish the circumstances were different." There was no awkward handshake, no forced enthusiasm. Instead, she simply opened her arms, offering a hug that I accepted gratefully. It felt genuine welcoming in a way I hadn't experienced from an adult in years. "Let's get you inside," she suggested. "You must be exhausted." The interior of the house was just as impressive as its exterior. Soaring ceilings, minimalist furnishings, art pieces that I suspected were original works by significant artists. But unlike Richard's mansion, which had always felt like a museum, where I was an unwelcome visitor, this space felt livable, comfortable, despite its luxury. "Your room is this way," my father said, leading me down a hallway. Sophia helped prepare it. "We didn't have much time, but we can personalize it however you want." He opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with its own private balcony overlooking the ocean. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with a desk occupied another corner. The colors were soothing blues and greens echoing the sea, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "This is for me," I asked, unable to hide my shock. "Of course," Sophia replied, "though we can redecorate if it's not your style." "It's perfect," I whispered, overwhelmed by the contrast between this welcoming space and the small isolated room I had occupied in Richard's house. "Why don't you get some rest?" my father suggested. "We can talk more in the morning." Exhaustion suddenly hit me like a physical weight. Between the emotional trauma of the day and the time difference between coasts, I was barely able to keep my eyes open. I nodded gratefully, and they left me to settle in. I was asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow, too tired even to process the drastic changes the day had brought. The next morning, I woke disoriented, momentarily confused by the sound of waves and the quality of light filtering through unfamiliar windows. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, bringing with them a fresh wave of pain and confusion. I made my way to the adjoining bathroom, where I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My eyes were puffy from crying my hair a tangled mess. I looked like exactly what I was, a girl who had been abandoned by her mother and whose world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The realization hit me all at once, and I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. This wasn't just about being left at an airport. It was about years of feeling unwanted, years of trying to make myself smaller, less needy, less visible in hopes that it would make my mother love me. I'm not sure how long I sat there crying, but eventually there was a gentle knock at the door. "Angela, are you okay?" It was my father's voice, concerned. I couldn't answer through my tears. After a moment, the door opened slightly and he peered in. Seeing me on the floor, he immediately came to my side, kneeling next to me. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured, pulling me into his arms. For the second time in 24 hours, I broke down completely in my father's embrace. He didn't try to shush me or tell me it would be okay. He simply held me solid and present, allowing me the space to feel the full force of my grief. When my tears finally subsided, he helped me to my feet. "Come on, Sophia made breakfast. Food won't fix anything, but it might help you feel a little more human." Downstairs, Sophia was in the kitchen, arranging fruit on a platter. She took one look at my tear-stained face and gave me a sad smile of understanding. "Rough morning?" she asked simply. I nodded, appreciating her directness. "Sit, eat something, then we can figure out next steps." The normalcy of sitting at a kitchen island, eating fresh fruit and homemade waffles, provided a strange counterpoint to the chaos of my emotions. Neither my father nor Sophia pressed me to talk, allowing me the space to simply exist in my confusion and pain. As we were clearing dishes, my father broached the subject we had all been avoiding. "We need to talk about what happens next, Angela." I nodded, bracing myself. "Your mother hasn't contacted you?" he asked. I checked my phone. No messages, no calls. It had been nearly 24 hours since she had left me at JFK. Nothing since yesterday. A muscle worked in my father's jaw, the only outward sign of his anger. "I've consulted with my attorney. Given the circumstances, we have grounds to file for an emergency change of custody. You want me to live here with you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, revealing my insecurity. His expression softened immediately. "More than anything, it's what I've wanted since the day your mother took you away." Fresh tears sprang to my eyes, but these were different. These came from a place of relief, of finally feeling wanted. "What about Mum?" I asked, hating that I still cared what she thought after what she had done. She abandoned a minor at an airport, Sophia pointed out gently. That's not just morally reprehensible, it's potentially criminal neglect. We won't pursue criminal charges unless you want to, my father assured me. But we will file for full custody. No judge will side with her after this. The thought of never having to return to Richard's house, never having to endure Taylor's snide comments, or Jackson's dismissive attitude, never having to feel like an unwelcome intruder in my own home, was overwhelming in its relief. Okay, I agreed quietly. There's something else, my father said, exchanging a glance with Sophia. We need to go shopping. You left with just one suitcase, and you'll need more than that. I don't want to be a burden, I protested automatically, the response ingrained after years of being made to feel exactly that. Sophia's expression turned fierce. You are not and never will be a burden in this house, Angela. Your family. The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, broke something open inside me. I had been so long without unconditional acceptance that I hardly knew how to receive it. That afternoon, Sophia took me shopping. Not the reluctant rushed trips I had experienced with my mother, but a thoughtful expedition where my preferences were not only considered but prioritized. Get whatever you like, she encouraged as we browsed through a department store. This is your fresh start. By the end of the day, we had purchased an entirely new wardrobe, school supplies, decorations for my room, and even a laptop for the upcoming school year. Not once did Sophia glance at price tags or make me feel guilty for selecting something I liked. Meanwhile, my father was setting legal proceedings in motion. He had hired one of Los Angeles' top family law attorneys, who was preparing to file for emergency custody based on abandonment and neglect. That evening, as we sat on the terrace watching the sunset over the Pacific, my phone finally rang with my mother's FaceTime call. My hand trembled as I showed the screen to my father. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, he said, but I knew I needed to face her. I pressed accept and my mother's face appeared on the screen. She was lounging by a pool, her skin already tanning, wearing large sunglasses and a colourful sarong. Angela, there you are, she said, her tone casual as if she hadn't abandoned me at an airport the previous day. Where did you end up staying? The audacity of her question left me momentarily speechless. My father moved to stand behind me out of frame, but offering silent support. I'm with Dad, I finally managed to say. Her expression froze. What do you mean you're with your father? How did you get to California? He came and got me after you left me at the airport, I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. She pushed her sunglasses up, her eyes narrowing. You are being so dramatic. It was just a mix-up with the tickets. A mix-up? I repeated incredulously. You texted me to figure it out myself while you boarded a plane to Bali. These things happen, she said dismissively. You could have called a friend to pick you up. The casual cruelty of her response ignited something inside me. Anger replaced hurt, burning away the last of my tears. You abandoned me, I stated clearly. You left your 15-year-old daughter alone at an airport so you could go on vacation with your new family. Don't be so dramatic, it's just a vacation. My father placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. Patricia, he said, moving into frame. What you did was child abandonment. We've already filed for emergency custody, and given the circumstances, no judge in the country will rule in your favor. My mother's face contorted with surprise and then anger. You have no right. I have every right. My father cut her off. You left our daughter at an airport without a ticket or a plan. That's neglect, possibly criminal endangerment of a minor. Be grateful we haven't contacted the authorities. She sputtered, trying to regain control of the conversation. Angela, don't listen to him. This is all a misunderstanding. When you get back. I interrupted, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. I won't be there. I'm staying with Dad now. Without waiting for her response, I ended the call, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. For the first time in years, I had stood up to my mother, and it felt like the beginning of reclaiming myself. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as my father and I began establishing a new life together. We met with the family law attorney who filed for emergency custody modification based on my mother's abandonment. Given the circumstances and the clear text messages she had sent, the judge quickly granted temporary custody to my father while setting a date for a formal hearing after my mother's return from Bali. I began therapy sessions with a kind, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Levine, who specialized in adolescent trauma and parental abandonment. In our first session, I could barely speak through my tears. By our third, I was beginning to process the complex emotions surrounding not just my mother's final act of rejection, but the years of emotional neglect that had preceded it. What you're feeling is normal, Dr. Levine assured me. The grief, the anger, the confusion, these are all appropriate responses to a profound betrayal. Meanwhile, my mother and her family continued their Bali vacation as if nothing had happened. Through social media, which I couldn't stop myself from checking despite Dr. Levine's advice, I saw photos of them snorkeling, lounging on beaches, exploring temples, all with carefree smiles, as if they hadn't left me behind at an airport just days earlier. Each post was like a fresh wound, a reminder that I had been so easily discarded. But each day in my father's home provided a balm to those wounds. He and Sophia went out of their way to make me feel welcome, included, valued. I met my father's staff, a housekeeper named Maria, who immediately fussed over me being too thin, a groundskeeper named Jorge, who showed me the garden he had planted, and my father's assistant, Danielle, who helped arrange my school transfer. Unlike in Richard's house, where the staff had treated me as an afterthought, here I was welcomed as an important member of the household. Your father talks about you all the time, Danielle confided one afternoon as she helped me complete enrollment paperwork for my new school. He has your school photos on his desk. Every year, even when you didn't send them, he would contact your school directly for a copy. This revelation brought fresh tears to my eyes. While I had been feeling abandoned by him, he had been keeping me close in the only ways available to him. As the day of my mother's return to New York approached, my father and I had several conversations about retrieving my belongings from Richard's house. We could hire someone to pack everything, he suggested. But I shook my head. I need to go myself. I need closure. He understood making arrangements for us to fly back to New York once we received confirmation of my mother's return. What he didn't tell me until the day before our trip was that he had also been working on another front. There's something you should know, he said as we sat in his home office. After your mother left you at the airport, I did some investigating into her financial situation. I waited, unsure where this was going. It turns out that Richard's company has been struggling. They've been keeping up appearances, but they're over-leveraged. The house they live in has a significant mortgage that's behind on payments. Okay, I said slowly. What does that mean? It means, my father continued, that when the bank was looking to sell the debt, my company bought it. It took me a moment to process what he was saying. You own their mortgage. He nodded. We do. And they're 3 months behind on payments, which legally allows us to begin foreclosure proceedings. Are you going to take their house? I asked, torn between shock and a small, vindictive part of me that found satisfaction in the idea. That depends on you, he replied seriously. This is your mother we're talking about, despite what she's done. I won't make that decision without your input. I thought about it overnight, weighing the anger I felt against the person I wanted to be. By morning, I had my answer. I don't want to make them homeless, I told my father over breakfast. But I don't want things to be easy for them either. He nodded, respecting my decision. How about this? We give them 30 days' notice to either bring the payments current or vacate the property. It's what any bank would do in this situation. It seemed fair, consequences for their actions without excessive cruelty. The next day, we flew to New York on my father's private jet. A car was waiting at the airport along with 2 men whom my father introduced as our security detail, and a woman who was our legal representative. We drove directly to Richard's house, arriving mid-morning when we knew they would be home. The security cameras captured our approach, and by the time we reached the front door, my mother was already opening it. Her expression a mixture of surprise and anger. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, looking between me and my father. We're here for Angela's belongings, Guts, my father stated calmly. As per the temporary custody order granted by Judge Rosenberg. He handed her a document which she barely glanced at. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. You can't just show up. Actually, we can, the legal representative interjected smoothly. The court order specifies that Mr. Williams and Angela are entitled to retrieve all of her personal property. We also have a police escort arriving shortly as a precaution. As if on cue, a patrol car pulled into the driveway behind us. My mother's face paled. Fine, she snapped, stepping aside to let us enter. Take what's yours and go. Inside, Richard stood in the foyer, his usual confident demeanour replaced by obvious discomfort. Behind him on the stairs, I could see Taylor and Jackson watching with unconcealed curiosity. Angela, Richard acknowledged stiffly. I trust you are well. Better than I was when you abandoned me at an airport, I replied, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. He had the grace to look ashamed but offered no apology. We proceeded to my old room, accompanied by my mother, who kept up a running commentary about how I was overreacting, how families sometimes had misunderstandings, how I was being unfair to her. I ignored her, focusing on gathering my belongings. Books, clothes, the few mementos I had kept from my childhood photographs, a stuffed rabbit my father had given me, journals I had filled with stories and thoughts over the years. As I packed, I noticed a box on the high shelf of my closet that I didn't recognize. Standing on a chair to reach it, I discovered it contained letters, dozens of them addressed to me in my father's handwriting, all with their seals broken. "What are these?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My mother glanced at the box and shrugged. "Old mail. Nothing important." With trembling hands, I opened one letter. It was dated 3 years earlier on my 12th birthday. "My dearest Angela," it began, "not a day goes by that I don't think of you and wish I could be there to celebrate with you." Tears blurred my vision as I realized what I was holding. Years of communication from my father that my mother had intercepted, read and hidden from me. "You kept these from me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "All these years you let me believe he didn't care enough to write. I was protecting you," she defended weakly. "From what?" "From knowing my father loved me, from having a relationship with him." She had no answer. I gathered the box of letters, holding it close to my chest like the treasure it was. "I'm taking these." "Whatever," she replied dismissively. "They're just going to collect dust anyway." Her casual disregard for something so precious, so potentially life-changing, crystallized everything I had come to understand about my mother. She was incapable of seeing beyond her own desires and needs. My feelings, my well-being had always been secondary at best. As we finished packing my belongings, my father entered the room, accompanied by the legal representative. "We're almost done here," he told me gently before turning to my mother. "Patricia, this is for you and Richard." He handed her another document. "What now?" she asked irritably. "It's a notice to cure default or vacate the premises within 30 days, the legal representative explained. "Westridge Capital now holds your mortgage, which is 3 months in arrears." My mother's face went from annoyed to shocked in an instant. "What are you talking about?" "Your husband's financial difficulties are more significant than you realize," my father said calmly. "My company has acquired your mortgage from the bank. You have 30 days to bring the payments current or find alternative accommodation." "You can't do this," she exclaimed. "This is our home. Actually, it's the bank's home until the mortgage is paid in full," the representative corrected. "And now Westridge Capital is your lender. The terms are clearly outlined in the document." Richard appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I'm afraid not," my father replied. "But I'm a reasonable man. Bring the payments current and you can stay. Otherwise we'll proceed with legal eviction." The chaos that erupted next was both terrible and somehow satisfying. My mother screamed accusations, Richard made desperate phone calls to his financial advisors, and I stood in the middle of it all, clutching my box of letters and feeling strangely detached from the drama. As we prepared to leave, my mother made one last attempt to assert control. "Angela, you can't seriously choose him over me. I'm your mother." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Behind the designer clothes and perfect makeup, I saw someone who had always been more concerned with appearances than with love, more interested in what others could do for her than what she could do for them. "You chose your new family over me," I said quietly. "Now you can live with that choice." With those words, I walked out of the house, leaving behind not just my possessions, but the weight of trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it freely. 1 year later, I sat on the beach behind my father's house, my house now watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and pink. So much had changed since that terrible day at JFK Airport. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. Given the clear evidence of abandonment, the judge had granted my father full custody with no visitation rights for my mother unless I explicitly requested them. I hadn't. Richard and my mother had failed to bring their mortgage current, resulting in their eviction from the Westchester mansion. They had downsized dramatically to an apartment in the city where the cracks in their relationship already present beneath the veneer of luxury had widened into chasms. According to the last update I had received, they were in the process of divorcing. Taylor and Jackson, stripped of their privileged lifestyle, had apparently been forced to confront some hard truths about their mother and father. Surprisingly, Taylor had reached out to me via social media several months after the eviction. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," she had written. "I didn't understand then what I do now about your mum, about my dad, about everything." We weren't friends exactly, but there was a tentative line of communication open that might someday lead to something more. My mother still sent occasional messages alternating between guilt trips and attempts at reconciliation. "I miss you," she would write, or "You can't shut me out forever, I'm still your mother." I read them but rarely responded. Dr. Levine had helped me understand that establishing boundaries wasn't the same as holding grudges, that protecting myself from further harm wasn't the same as being unforgiving. My life in California had taken on a rhythm and richness I had never experienced in New York. I had transferred to a private school where for the first time I had made real friends. My passion for writing had been encouraged by an English teacher who recognized my talent leading to publication in the school's literary magazine and plans to pursue journalism in college. My father had proven to be everything I had yearned for during those lonely years in my mother's care. He was attentive without being overbearing, supportive without being controlling. He showed up for every school event, took genuine interest in my friends and activities, and never once made me feel like an inconvenience. Sophia, too, had become an essential part of my life. She wasn't trying to replace my mother, which perhaps was why I had found it so easy to accept her. She was simply herself, kind, straightforward, unfailingly honest. 3 months ago, my father had proposed, and their small wedding was scheduled for the following spring. I would be the maid of honor. The sound of footsteps on sand pulled me from my thoughts. My father settled beside me on the beach, following my gaze to the horizon. "Penny for your thoughts, sir?" he offered. "Just reflecting," I replied. "It's been quite a year." He nodded, giving me space to continue if I wanted to. "I got another message from Mom today," I said after a pause. "And how do you feel about that?" It was the kind of question he always asked, open, genuine, concerned with my feelings rather than imposing his own. "I'm not angry anymore," I admitted. "Just sad. Sad that she couldn't be the mother I needed. Sad that she still doesn't really understand what she did wrong." He nodded again, listening. "Dr. Levine says I might want to meet with her someday on my terms when I'm ready. Not to rebuild the relationship necessarily, but for my own closure." "And what do you think about that?" I considered the question carefully. "I think someday I might, but not yet. Right now I'm still healing. Still figuring out who I am, without her voice in my head telling me I'm too much, too dramatic, too inconvenient." My father put his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into his embrace, feeling safe in a way I had forgotten was possible. "You know," he said softly, "the day I got your call from that airport was the worst and best day of my life. Worst because I couldn't bear the thought of you in pain. Best because it brought you back to me." "Do you ever regret buying their mortgage?" I asked. "Taking the house?" He considered this. "No, not the action itself, though. Sometimes I wonder about the motivation. Was it justice or vengeance? I'm still not sure." "Maybe both," I suggested. "Maybe. The line isn't always clear." He paused, then added, "But I've never regretted fighting for you, never regretted bringing you home. That's the clearest thing in my life." 5 years had passed since that fateful day at JFK. I was now a college graduate with a degree in journalism, standing at the beginning of a promising career with a major publication. My father and Sophia had travelled across the country to attend my graduation, beaming with pride as I received my diploma. Life had unfolded in ways I could never have imagined when I stood abandoned in that airport terminal. The path hadn't been easy. There had been nightmares, anxiety attacks, moments of doubt and darkness. But there had also been healing growth, the discovery of strength I hadn't known I possessed. Last year I had finally agreed to meet with my mother. We had coffee at a neutral location in Manhattan during one of my work trips. She looked older, the stress of the past years evident in the lines around her eyes and the less expensive clothes she now wore. "You look well," she had said, studying me with something like surprise. "I am well," I confirmed. Our conversation was stilted, awkward. She made tentative attempts to re-establish a connection, speaking of mundane things like the weather and her new job as a real estate agent. I listened politely, but maintained the emotional boundaries I had worked so hard to build. When she finally broached the subject of the abandonment, her apology was predictably self-centered. "I was going through so much then," she explained. "Richard was pressuring me, and I just cracked under the strain." I didn't point out that many parents face pressure without abandoning their children at airports. I simply nodded and said, "I've made peace with what happened. It led me where I needed to be." We parted without promises of future meetings or attempts to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reconciliation. It was simply the quiet closing of a chapter, allowing both of us to move forward on separate paths. My journey from abandoned teen to confident young woman had taught me lessons I now shared through my writing and through volunteer work with teens in similar situations. I had learned that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who shows up when you need them most. That sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need. That healing isn't linear, but comes in waves, in moments of breakthrough, followed by setbacks that eventually become less frequent, less overwhelming. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't dependent on others' ability to see it, that I was enough just as I was, without having to make myself smaller to accommodate someone else's limitations. As I look back on that day at JFK, I can now see it for what it was, not just an ending, but a beginning, the moment when I stopped waiting for my mother to become the parent I needed, and found the courage to build a different life, surrounded by people who valued me, not despite who I was, but because of it. Have you ever experienced a moment that seemed like the worst thing possible, only to realize later it was leading you exactly where you needed to go? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that. Sometimes our deepest wounds can lead to unexpected healing. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, family isn't always who you're born to, but who makes you feel at home.